You're standing in an open field, and thundering toward you at 30 miles per hour is 800 pounds of steel, wrapped around 200 pounds of pure medieval violence. The ground shakes beneath your feet. You think you're tough. You think your gym membership means something. You think your weekend warrior mentality and your protein shakes have prepared you for anything. You're about to discover just how catastrophically wrong you are. The average Crusader knight would obliterate you so completely that your great-grandfather would feel the impact. This wouldn't be a fight. This would be a demonstration of everything. Modern humans have forgotten about raw, terrifying power. Let me paint you the real picture of what these medieval killing machines were actually capable of. Because everything you think you know about knights is probably wrong. The year is 1095. Pope Urban II has just called for the First Crusade. Across Europe, something awakens that would make modern special forces look like weekend hobbyists. These weren't the clunky, slow-moving tin cans that Hollywood has programmed into your brain. These were apex predators who had spent their entire existence perfecting the art of mounted warfare. At age 7, a future knight began his training as a page. While modern 7-year-olds are learning to tie their shoes, these children were learning to handle weapons that weighed more than most people today can lift. By 12, they became squires, spending the next 6 years learning horsemanship that would make Olympic equestrians weep with envy. The selection process alone would eliminate 99% of modern humans before they even began. Knights came from the warrior aristocracy, bred for size, strength, and aggression across generations. The average knight stood 6 feet tall in an era when the common man barely reached 5.5 feet. They weren't just tall. They were built like human tanks. Take Godfrey of Bouillon, one of the leaders of the First Crusade. Contemporary chronicles describe this man as capable of cleaving a fully armored Saracen warrior completely in half with a single stroke of his sword. This wasn't metaphor. This wasn't exaggeration. Witnesses documented him splitting men from shoulder to hip, like they were made of parchment. The physical conditioning required for knighthood makes modern athletic training look like gentle yoga. Knights spent 8 to 10 hours daily in full armor, which weighed between 60 and 80 pounds. They could mount their 1,500-pound destrier war horses in full armor without assistance, vault into the saddle with the grace of a gymnast, and fight for hours without fatigue. Studies of medieval skeletons have revealed bone density measurements that exceed modern professional athletes by margins that seem almost impossible. The repetitive stress of wielding medieval weapons created skeletal adaptations that turned their very bones into weapons. Their grip strength, measured through analysis of muscle attachment points, averaged over 200 pounds per square inch. But here's where it gets terrifying. This wasn't just physical superiority. Knights developed a psychological conditioning that modern humans simply cannot comprehend. They were raised from childhood to view combat not as a last resort, but as their primary purpose in life. Violence wasn't something they occasionally engaged in. Violence was their religion. The Crusader mentality combined religious fanaticism with martial expertise in a way that created something beyond human. These men believed that dying in battle guaranteed them immediate entry into paradise. They didn't fear death. They courted it. They welcomed it. They rode toward it, with the enthusiasm that modern people reserve for vacation destinations. The weapons they wielded would leave modern humans helpless before they even made contact. A knight's sword wasn't the delicate rapier you see in movies. It was 3 to 4 feet of perfectly balanced steel that weighed between 2 and 4 pounds. In the hands of a trained knight, it could penetrate mail armor, shatter bones, and deliver killing blows through gaps so small that most people wouldn't even notice them. The lance, their primary weapon during a charge, was 12 feet of ash, wood tipped with a steel point designed for one purpose: punching through armor and into the human body beneath. During impact, the combined force of horse and rider generated enough kinetic energy to drive that lance point through a man and into the person standing behind him. Knights mastered the technique of controlled falling. When they struck with their lances, they didn't just rely on the horse's momentum. They threw their entire body weight behind the impact, using gravity and muscle power to multiply the force by factors that modern physics can barely calculate. The result was devastating impact that could stop a charging formation dead in its tracks. Archaeological evidence from Crusade battlefields reveals the brutal effectiveness of knight tactics. At the Battle of Dorylaeum in 1097, a single charge by 300 knights routed an army of nearly 20,000 Turkish warriors. The impact was so devastating that contemporary Muslim chroniclers described it as supernatural, claiming the knights moved like demons and struck like lightning. The psychological warfare they employed would break modern minds before physical contact ever occurred. Knights used their appearance as a weapon. Their armor wasn't just protection, it was intimidation. The sight of a fully armored knight approaching at full gallop triggered primal fear responses in opponents who had never seen anything like it. The sound alone was psychological torture. 800 pounds of steel and horseflesh thundering across the battlefield created a noise that could be heard from miles away. The ground literally shook. Horses reared. Men fled before the knights even reached weapon range. Everything you think you know about medieval armor is wrong. The reality is terrifying. Knight armor wasn't heavy and cumbersome. It was perfectly articulated engineering that allowed complete freedom of movement while providing protection that modern body armor can't match. Knights could perform acrobatics in full armor. They could sprint, jump, climb, and fight with the agility of unencumbered athletes. The armor itself was a work of art that represented thousands of hours of master craftsmanship. Each piece was custom-fitted to the individual knight's body, creating a second skin of steel that moved like natural flesh. The joints were so precisely engineered that they provided protection while maintaining full range of motion. But here's what makes this truly terrifying for any modern person. Knights weren't just physically and technically superior. They were mentally constructed for warfare in ways that modern humans cannot comprehend. They had no concept of fair fighting. They had no understanding of proportional response. They knew only total victory or glorious death. Modern combat sports have rules. Medieval warfare had none. Knights were trained to exploit every advantage, to strike without warning, to show no mercy, and to continue fighting until their enemies were completely destroyed. They viewed combat as a sacred duty and approached it with religious devotion. The psychological profile of a Crusader knight would be diagnosed as psychopathic by modern standards. They demonstrated complete lack of empathy for their enemies, absolute certainty in their cause, and willing embrace of extreme violence as their primary tool for problem solving. These weren't soldiers. They were zealots wrapped in steel. Their training regimen would hospitalize modern athletes within days. Knights spent their entire lives preparing for combat. They practiced weapon work 8 hours daily, rode in full armor across terrain that would challenge modern off-road vehicles, and engaged in mock combat that regularly resulted in serious injuries and occasional deaths. The conditioning was both physical and mental. Knights were taught to ignore pain, to fight through injuries that would incapacitate normal humans, and to view their own lives as expendable resources in service of their cause. They trained to continue fighting with broken bones, severe lacerations, and wounds that would send modern people into shock. Take the technical specifications that would absolutely destroy you. A knight's destrier warhorse weighed between 1,500 and 1,800 pounds and was trained specifically for combat. These weren't gentle riding horses. They were living weapons trained to bite, kick, and trample enemies. The combined weight of horse, rider, and armor created a battering ram that moved at 30 miles per hour. The impact force of a knight's charge has been calculated by modern physicists at over 4,000 pounds per square inch at the point of lance contact. To put this in perspective, it takes only 60 pounds per square inch to break human ribs. A knight's charge delivered over 60 times that force in a concentrated point designed to penetrate armor and destroy everything behind it. The lance. Technique itself was engineering perfection. Knights learned to absorb the massive shock of impact through their entire body, distributing the force from the point of contact through their arm, across their torso, down their spine, and into their stirrups. This allowed them to deliver devastating impact while remaining mounted and ready for immediate follow-up attacks. Their sword work was equally devastating. Knights could generate cutting forces of over 800 pounds per square inch with their blades. Modern testing has shown that a trained knight could cleave through contemporary steel helmets with a single overhead strike. The technique involved using gravity, muscle power, and precise edge alignment to concentrate enormous force into a cutting edge mere millimeters wide. You wouldn't last 30 seconds against a medieval knight. Not 30 minutes, not 30 seconds. You would break instantly upon contact. Your modern fitness, your weekend martial arts training, your confidence built on participation trophies and safe spaces would evaporate the moment you faced something genuinely designed to kill. The reality is that you've been living in a bubble of safety and comfort that has completely disconnected you from what humans are actually capable of when survival depends on violence. Knights lived in a world where weakness meant death, where hesitation was fatal, and where only the absolutely strongest survived to reproduce. Your muscles, built in climate-controlled gyms with perfect nutrition and medical support, would cramp within minutes under the stress of real combat. Your cardiovascular system, trained on treadmills and elliptical machines, would fail when faced with the anaerobic demands of fighting for your life. Your mind, conditioned by a society that treats aggression as pathology, would shatter when confronted with someone who approached violence as art. You wouldn't understand their mindset. You couldn't process their capabilities. You would stand there, paralyzed by the impossibility of what you were seeing, while 800 pounds of medieval death machine turned you into a historical footnote. So the next time you feel confident about your physical capabilities, remember this. You're standing in an open field, and thundering toward you is everything that modern humanity has forgotten about: power, violence, and the will to use both without hesitation. The ground shakes beneath your feet, and you finally understand that some gaps between past and present can never be bridged by good intentions and gymnasium memberships.